The first thing the forest said to Maya Chen was her name. It came in the hush after she killed the truck's engine and the night surged back in. A velvet pressure, a temperature, a living thing. A breath moved through the pines like a low exhale, and under it, almost lost in the rasp of needles, a syllable slipped. May. Maybe it was wind. Maybe it was the way the trees leaned toward the dirt road, as if craning for a better look at the newcomer. But it hooked her anyway. She sat with both hands on the wheel and the feeling that the woods had just recognized someone it had been expecting. The station lights glowed a tired amber against the blue of evening. Pinebrook looked like it had been built by two different men who refused to speak. The front half, a friendly log cabin face with a ramp and a porch. The back half, a poured concrete bunker shouldered into the hill, windowless and stern. Someone had stained one wall a shade too warm, and left the other to weather to grey. The sign above the door was hand-carved and government issue at the same time. The forest pressed close on all sides. Tall trunks crowding like strangers at a bus stop. Maya stepped down and smelled cold sap and machine oil. Inside, the station breathed in electronics, the hum of the base radios, a chorus of green LEDs along a rack, a coffee pot that had been on too long. Maps papered the walls, layered and pinned, contour lines, trail routes, sector boundaries drawn in the careful hand of someone who measured his days in miles and minor emergencies. A pegboard bristled with keys and tags. A corkboard held missing dog flyers, and a Polaroid of a 13-inch brook trout, held up by a man whose grin looked like an apology. "Chen?" The voice came from a doorway at the end of the hall, and the man attached to it filled the frame without trying. Ranger Jackson had the kind of face that made you guess at previous damage, a crooked set to the nose, a scar like a white thread tucked into the beard. His uniform was the particular green that only ever looked new on catalog models. On him it looked worked in, like a second skin. "Welcome to the night shift." Maya straightened, offered her hand. "Ranger Jackson, thank you for—" "Jackson is fine." His grip was dry and brief. His eyes were the color of old denim, watchful but not unfriendly. "You're early. I like that." He tipped his chin toward the radio room. "Come on. Let's do the dull part." The briefing was the kind of competent monotony Maya had always loved. It made her feel like she was stepping into a shape that fit. Jackson stood beside a topographical map the size of a bedsheet, and sketched the routes with a blunt forefinger, the plastic squeak of his nail on the laminate, sounding like a pencil on wet paper. "Trail A loops here. Family sites, the ones who pack half a house and ask if we have outlets in the trees. Trail B's the solitude they think they want until midnight. Trail C." His finger stopped over a section boxed in yellow tape. A label read Sector 7. "Closed. Maintenance," he said. The word had the weight of a door closing. "Etexos. Etexos. Log your position at the top of each hour on the main channel. If you find an illegal fire, you put it out, and write it up. If you smell smoke, and can't find it, you call me and we'll make it our problem. If a camper is lost, calm voice, slow questions. People mirror what we give them." Maya nodded, absorbing, matching his rhythm. "Bears? Don't let them eat the problem," Jackson said. "We'd never hear the end of it." He showed her the kit: trauma pouch, foil blankets, a thermal scope that looked like a bulky flashlight, 3 spare radios wrapped in zip bags. He said the numbers like prayer, repeater frequencies, emergency bands, backup batteries labeled with dates. The station's clock clicked to 2042. Jackson set the clipboard down and studied her for a beat like he was measuring her edges. "You've done nights before?" "Ride along," she said. "College program. Mostly firewatch and drunks." "Drunks you can see." He touched the brim of his hat like it itched and didn't. "We're by the book, Chen. It's how people go home. I'll say this once, because I'm supposed to, and because I mean it." He pointed past her shoulder, not to the map this time, but to the dark square of the station's back window, where the night had its face pressed to the glass. Stick to the marked trails. Don't cut. Don't shortcut. The ground out there remembers when it ran before we put lines on it." She smiled like she understood, like it was a poetic version of a safety lecture. "Yes, sir." He started for the door, then hesitated. The pause changed the temperature of the room by a degree. "Chen," he said, without turning, "if your radio picks up chatter on channel 19, just turn it off." Maya huffed a laugh that didn't decide what it wanted to be. "Channel 19? That's not in the manual." "No," he looked at her over his shoulder. His eyes were old water. "It's not. He left the way men leave rooms they've slept in for years. Nothing for the door to remember after." Maya stood alone with the hum and her heartbeat. The maps didn't shift, but something in her sense of where the walls were seemed to ease out a little, like the building had taken the hint that it wasn't theirs anymore. By 9:30 she was outside, with her pack sitting right on her spine, and the kind of resolve that feels like a clean shirt. The temperature had slid down to that hour's particular cool, crickets not yet resigned to the night, frogs in the low places tuning their throats. The campsites on Trail A glowed in rings, firelight on faces, laughter with the rough edge of long day. Someone's guitar worked on the same 3 chords. A father warned a child about marshmallow sugar bombs with his mouth full of one. A couple argued softly in a tent about whether the zipper made that noise before. Maya walked with her light low, respectful, the beam a pale wedge through breath smoke and midges. She knew how to hear a forest, the difference between wind and something moving in it, the way limsqueak told you how wet the night was, how foxes came apart from the noise like a slipknot when they ran. She logged the hour on the main channel. Calm voice, professional cadence. Pinebrook Base, Ranger Chen on Trail A at marker 3 continuing north. Jackson's acknowledgement came fast. Copy. Chen. It had the cuffed and rolled sound of a man who saves words for when they buy him something. At marker 6 she found the first quiet patch that wasn't her own. The campus thinned and the pines drew together the way people do when the talk has gone private. The dark between trunks grew a shape, then another. She kept to the gravel, her boots speaking the language the trail understood. Up ahead, a pale triangle rose from the ground in the pitch, a faint seam of light along one side where a zipper had its memory. Unregistered. She could tell before she checked. No permit tag flapping from the stake, no yellow slip clipped to the post. She clicked her beam to a wider cone and edged in. The tent was the kind you borrowed from a friend who hadn't asked for it back in years. One camp chair faced the trees. It moved a little, as if a light hand had just left its back. On a 2-burner near the entrance sat a pot with a lid that had gathered small water beads like sweat, steam feathered in the cold. "Hello, Ranger," she called quietly. "Anyone here?" The dark arranged itself into polite refusal. She knelt and pressed the tent wall with the back of her fingers. Warm. Generous body warm, not day-stored. It pushed back the way something does when air inside is still holding on to skin heat. She widened the zipper and shone her light in fast. A quick sweep, and then down to floor level. A sleeping bag lay open like a peeled fruit, the dent of a person in it not yet given up. The pillow damp, where a cheek had been. A book on its face, the spine creased. She touched the bag and drew her hand away like a child from a stovetop. Warm. Someone had been here minutes ago. Her light caught a detail by accident, and then her eyes insisted on it. A length of fishing line tied to the zipper pull, run through a loop at the base of the chair, around the handle of the pot lid and off toward the trees. It was nothing, the way a spider web is nothing until you see its geometry. She stepped back and turned her radio up one click, throat suddenly too aware of itself. Pinebrook Base, Ranger Chen. "Go, Chen." Jackson's voice in her ear was the same as it had been across the room and yet different, smaller. Radios always made authority sound thinner. Trail A, unregistered site at Grid 6 Gamma. She recited it cleanly, like the trainings. Tent is zipped, gear outside, stove warm. Sleeping bag retains heat. She didn't say body heat. She didn't say the chair was rocking, no visual on occupant. The silence that came after was a shape with its own edges. Then Jackson's voice, clipped, copy unregistered, log as improper site registration and continue patrol. Maya frowned into the dark. Sir, gear is warm. I think we might have a medical. Maya, he didn't say Ranger Chen. He said her name and let the syllable scrape. Log it as improper registration. She wrote while she looked, pen pinched, like she could choke the ink off if she had to. Date, time, location, note about warmth that she crossed out and rewrote as recent use. She left the yellow tag tucked under the camp stove like a small, useless flag, and backed away with her light, purposely low. As if not to startle something that was already not there. Past the bend, the forest closed over the campsite with the gentlest of intentions, like a mouth after a spoon. Maya kept walking because that was what the book said to do. Her light carved a path long enough to stand on. The trees whispered in their high language. She heard a pair of owls trading work, question, answer, across a low rise. One call cut off mid-note, a sound truncated like a sentence interrupted at the name. She logged at the top of the hour again. The clock on her wrist watched her without blinking. The minutes behaved. They slid by in neat stacks. She breathed. 3 counts in, 3 out. She didn't know why she chose 3, but it felt like a bargain the night would understand. Trail A became the part of Trail B that pretended it was still A. The gravel gave way to packed dirt and duff, the kind that held a boot print like a quiet opinion. The campers' noise fell behind until it was memory. The lake showed between trunks, a suggestion of space rather than a surface. Her beam made old nails glow in stumps like small eyes. A fox ghosted the trail ahead and became brush when asked. At marker 9 the world fell back a half step the way it does in rooms after laughter stops. Maya felt it without anything to point at. A weight shift in the night. An intake of breath that didn't belong to air. She turned her light off and let her eyes soak the dark like cloth in dye. The forest was a shape against a deeper shape. She listened. Her ear found the big sounds first. Wind quartering through crowns, lake making and unmaking its edge. Under that, smaller truths. A mouse, adjusting the pressure of its belly to the ground. A distant tent zipper she would have missed if she hadn't been listening for a zipper. A heartbeat that was just hers, until it wasn't sure. She turned the light back on in one smooth thumb press, as if that had been the plan the whole time. The beam caught a strand of something thin at shin height glistening like a spider's work. Fishing line again, run from one sapling to another, a little taut smile. She stepped over and then turned to follow it with the beam. It drew her eye to another small decision. Then another. Tiny knots at the base of a bush, a bare patch of earth that should have been littered with needles if wind alone did the cleaning. Not traps, not for animals anyway. Trip lines for attention. For the story of it. Her radio clicked softly, the way it does when someone on the network breathes too close to a transmit button. She lifted it on reflex. Base, Chen, she said, voice low without meaning it to be. Do we have maintenance on Trail B tonight? A beat. Negative, Jackson said. Why? Just sign of activity, she said. Fishing line. Some structure. She heard herself, and hated the vagueness. She sounded like people whose statements lived forever inside incident reports you read with your jaw tight. Probably kids. Probably, Jackson said, and didn't ask for a photo. Keep moving. Maya did. Moving was the job. And the job was the way you made the unknown decide it respected you. At marker 11, which had a bullet groove in it like someone had taken aim at latitude once, she stepped off the main trail to check a spur that led to an overlook. The spur was shorter than she remembered from training. The overlook was smaller, the lake closer. Campfires on the far shore looked like someone had pressed a heated needle through the fabric of the dark. Her radio popped again. and this time she heard whisper speech under the static. The kind of sound you get when two people lean toward each other and don't want to be heard. She turned the volume up a notch, and got the tail end of something that might have been her name. She caught herself glancing at the channel number on the display, even though she knew where she'd left it. 1. The main. The one in the manual. The breath of the forest shifted, and brought her the scent of scorched coffee from somewhere it shouldn't have been. It put Grandad in her mouth for a second. It put mornings in hot kitchens on her tongue. It put a pot on a camp stove in her mind. She tucked her chin and kept walking, a little quicker now. The trail widened for no reason she could map and then narrowed like someone had reconsidered it. She logged again at the top of the hour. Base, Chen at marker 14, she said, pleased at the steadiness. All quiet. Copy, 14. Jackson's voice had a fatigue to it she hadn't noticed earlier. Not lack of sleep. Use. Voices wear when they spend nights on a radio like this. By 11:30 she was back in the neighborhood of people. Trail A again by grace of signage, though the fires had sunk to coalbeds and the laughter to murmurs. A dog woofed into a dream and stopped. A tent snored. When she passed the place where the unregistered site had been, she didn't turn her head. She saw anyway with the back of the eye. The way the tent wall had sighed against her hand, the shape of warmth. She told herself she would check it on the way back. She also told herself she wouldn't. Both sentences rang true. The radio gave a tiny, embarrassed throat clear. Then a voice that wore Jackson's vowels but not his patience came down the line. All units, be advised. No ranger should remain stationary for more than 3 hours during night shift. This is policy. Maya stopped with one boot hanging above gravel. Policy. The word came in a uniform she didn't recognize. She brought the radio up. Copy. Base, she said. Clarify. Stationary at a single checkpoint. A pause. When Jackson came back, he'd ironed himself flat again. Just what it says, Chen. Keep your feet under you. Understood. She didn't ask why the thing that sounded like a rule wasn't in the book. She had the feeling the book, and the night had filed for separation long ago. She kept moving because now the idea of stopping felt like saying please to a room with too many doors. The trees breathed with her. 3 in, 3 out. Somewhere between markers 15 and 16, the trail that should have curved right and hugged the lake for a while kept going straight. She felt the wrongness as a muscle twinge before she saw it. Her light painted a closure sign she couldn't have seen from here, because here had been 2 miles south on the map half an hour ago. Sector 7. Closed, said the sign in letters that had faded to the color of old teeth. A chain sagged between 2 posts, not trying very hard, the padlock on it new. Maya blinked and checked her GPS. The screen looked back at her like a teacher who had given you the grade the rubric said you deserved. The dot that was her insisted she was south of this, patrolling the safe lanes. It ticked along cheerfully, as she walked without walking. She thumbed the radio. Base. Chen. Clarify location from last log. Go, Jackson said. My GPS has me at 17 south. Visual indicates Sector 7 signage. That would be inconsistent. Silence came down that line like sleep. Her ear filled in a noise that would have been Jackson covering the mouthpiece with his palm while he remembered a plan. When his voice came back, it carried careful on both shoulders. What's your exact location right now, Chen? She looked at the sign as if it could answer better than she could. She read him the coordinates off the screen because that was what they'd practiced. He repeated them back, each number a pebble laid exactly where it belonged. You're supposed to be 2 miles south of there. I know, she said. And yet. She put her hand on the chain. It was colder than the air, as if it told a different time. She didn't shake it. She didn't step over. She didn't step back. There are silences made of nothing, and silences made of things stacked. This one had weight, Maya, Jackson said finally. Not Chen. Where are you standing right now? She swallowed. The word stuck a little, at the Sector 7 gate. The radio didn't answer, the forest did. Off to her right, deep enough into the trees to be part of them, a pot lid clinked against metal the way it does when water on the underside collects and lets go. There was no breeze where she stood, but a camp chair somewhere out of sight creaked, as if someone had just shifted their weight and decided not to stand up after all. Her hand went to the thermal scope at her belt. It came up in her palm like a habit she hadn't had time to learn yet. She thumbed it on, and the eyepiece presented her the world in a home video of hot and not. Trees were smears of relative. The chain was a neat blue bracket. And then, beyond the sign, down the closed path she saw circles. They lay on the ground like coins on a corpse's eyes, 7 of them in a loose arc. Each was 20 degrees colder than the earth around it, perfectly round in a landscape that made its shapes with wind and the patience of water. Base, she said because her mouth needed something to do, observing temperature anomalies, surface depressions with delta -20 Fahrenheit. Patterned, she heard herself and thought, listen to you, you sound like a document trying to save its own life. Where are you again? Jackson's voice had moved an inch higher in his throat. Sector 7 gate, she said, because there was no point in calling it anything else. My GPS. He cut across. Turn your radio off. Excuse me, sir? Turn it off now. The command snapped like a knot pulled tight. Stick to marked trails. Turn the radio off, and walk. The scope's view shifted as something moved beyond the last cold circle. She thought at first it was a person because that was the shape her mind preferred, but it was too slender in the wrong places and too jointed in the right. Her eye watered against the rubber cup. The something stepped near one circle and paused, and the cold intensified so fast the image dipped. The circles didn't smoke, they didn't frost, they held, as if they were not spots, but rules. Maya thumbed her radio off with a motion she could blame on protocol and not fear. The sudden absence of his voice in her ear made the night louder. She backed 4 steps without turning, because sometimes you have to let the thing watch you retreat so it knows you've understood your place. The chain hung without comment. The sign considered her. The forest accepted her apology without promise. Back on Trail A, probably B, the sounds of people returned like distant city noise, flattened and indistinct. She braced an elbow against a post and took a breath that tasted like sap and metal. Her watch clicked to the top of the hour. She lifted the radio that she had just turned off and didn't turn it on. She wanted to log so fiercely her throat hurt with it. She wanted Jackson's copy the way children want forgiveness for world-end sins like dropping eggs. She put the scope away. She looked at the trees the same way they had looked at the truck when she arrived, curious, measuring. An owl called just once from somewhere she couldn't put on a map, and then remembered to stop again. The air folded itself back over the space she had made by standing in it. Maya walked, because walking had not failed her yet. By the time she reached marker 19, the campground murmurs had become individual again. This tent, that man's laugh, this huff from a dog. She passed the unregistered site without turning her head and still saw, the way one sees with the bitter back of the eye, the bright pot lid, the sleeping bag cooling by degrees like a body remembering the word object. The camp chair made the same small noise chairs make when someone forgets to tell them to stop moving. She clicked the radio on before she could talk herself out of it. The speaker coughed and filled with a clean breath that wasn't hers. A voice said, in a tone that made the words a dare, "Pinebrook Station. This is Ranger Williams requesting immediate backup at Sector 7. We have campers missing and... God, what is that thing in the trees?" Maya stood as if rooted by the name. The trees reached up and reached down in the same moment. There was no Ranger Williams on the staff roster she had studied, until she could recite it backward. There hadn't been for decades, according to the old stories told with a shrug and a, you know how these things go. But the radio knew his name and the way panic narrows a man's voice until it's a wire ready to snap. She swallowed. This is Ranger Chen. Identify. Static climbed her words like ivy, and then her own voice came back at her from the speaker, warm and breathless, a marvel at itself. They're so beautiful up close, Maya. You should come see. Her finger lifted off the transmit by reflex like a burn. She stared at the radio as if it had been replaced by something that just wore its face. Her name in her voice made something in the low place behind her ribs go hollow. She turned her head to the sign she couldn't see through the trees and felt its presence anyway. The air between her and it had thickened, grown the weight of a creek you had to wade. She rolled her shoulder. She set her jaw the way you set a tent stake against wind. Then she did what the manual had failed to mention and the man had not. She walked, slow and deliberate, away from where the night had just called her by name. Behind her, the owl's call came halfway, and then remembered not to finish. The chair creaked once and stopped to listen. The pot lid waited for the next bead of water to gather and fall. The forest kept her pace without sound, and when she logged at the top of the hour, her voice sounded exactly like a person who believed the book was still strong enough to hold them. Copy, Jackson said. He didn't ask where she was, he didn't tell. The map on the wall in the station a mile away did not move under its pins, but if you had been standing in front of it right then, in that hum-lit room, you might have sworn the yellow tape around Sector 7 curled inward a fraction, as if a corner had lifted in a draft that wasn't there. The policy announcement landed like a stone dropped down a well, and the echo took too long to come back. She was writing up a noise complaint that didn't need writing. 2 sights over a guitar had picked up new confidence, and the woman in the next tent had decided to sing along with the part of her heart that was still in high school, when the radio crackled with the kind of urgency that made you stand before your brain told your knees. All units be advised, came Jackson's voice, but it was Jackson as if heard through a cracked door, faster, thinner, with a fuzz around the words like they were being hurried along from behind. No ranger remains stationary for more than 3 hours during night shift. This is policy. Maya stared at the handset. Copy policy, she said, because the trained mouth speaks when the thinking parts can't find foothold. She checked her watch without meaning to. She hadn't been still 3 hours, not anywhere. But the phrase fastened itself to her nervous system. Don't stop. It wasn't in any manual, it was written into the trees. She packed the clipboard even though the complaint could have padded out the hour. Her headlamp threw her shadow long and limb-split across the ground as she moved away from the camps and into the strip of forest between human noise and the lake's unlit thought. Each step found the next like stones showing as the tide fell. She kept her beam low. The forest that had been a set of facts earlier now had opinions. She could feel its gaze on her back the way you feel weather coming up behind you. Something with a front edge and a plan. The sense of being watched never arrived as a jump scare. It built in layers. A gap in the chorus of insects that traveled with her. A thread of cool air against the nape as if a window had opened too close. The way the understory seemed to have been combed. Every few minutes she looked over her shoulder and saw nothing. The nothing had shape. Her radio took a breath on its own. Static whiskered. Then the bleed-through she'd learned to ignore found words, and those words found the exact place to sit inside her ribs. Pinebrook Station, this is Ranger Williams requesting immediate backup at Sector 7. We have campers missing and... The voice went bright with terror and thinned. God, what is that thing in the trees? Her stomach pulled itself small. The name came with a story she'd never been told, but had always been implied by the way older rangers used the break room at night. The chair nobody sat in, the mug nobody used but nobody washed. She did not know a Ranger Williams. She knew men like him in other stations who existed in past tense more comfortably than present. Sector 7 was a box on a map held shut by tape and consent. She shouldn't have answered. She did anyway. Ranger Williams, this is Ranger Chen. What's your location? Silence. Then the small click that told her she wasn't the only one who had leaned too close to a transmit button. When the voice returned, it wore her mouth. "They're so beautiful up close, Maya, you should come see." She nearly dropped the unit. The way her name came out of it. Her breath. The exact inflection she heard when she recorded her voicemail and hated herself. Made the woods around her shift a fraction closer. She switched back to main channel with a motion so practiced it didn't shake. "Jackson, I'm receiving chatter on 19. Where are you?" he cut in. His voice had none of the grin he'd put on for the other rangers when they came off shift. It had no room for copy. "Give me your location." She read coordinates. "Trail B near 16. She almost said the Sector 7 sign is in front of me and didn't, because the part of her that had learned to keep certain facts in the chest and not the mouth was quicker than fear. "You're not near it," he said. It didn't matter that she hadn't mentioned it. "You're nowhere near it. Turn your radio off." "Sir, if someone's—" "Turn it off." The two words had a handle built into them. "Now." She flicked the switch. The sudden drop in noise made the night draw itself up. She took one step back toward the safer geometry of people. The forest accepted it, and did not make fun. The rule sat in her bones like a weight. Keep moving. She did. She checked quiet sites. She wrote what didn't need writing. She let her light slide carefully over things that did not want it. She told herself she was pushing the unease ahead of her like a broom. She knew she was dragging it behind. At the hour that makes the body most convinced it should be a body somewhere else, hips heavy, eyes sanded, every small ache declaring itself unionized, she decided to prove the world was still bound by measurables. She took the thermal scope from her belt because heat was heat and cold was cold, and neither gave a damn about campfire ghost stories. She swept in a slow grid from knee-height to waist and up into the column of trunks. The view bled everything into gradients she could name. Warm fox path. The cooling surprise of a raccoon. The hot stitch of her own footprints where she'd been standing too long. Then the picture changed in a way that her eye didn't register before her body did. Her scalp prickled. The scope showed the ground ahead as a field of mottled oranges and dull reds, and there inside it, a perfect coin of deep cobalt blue. She took half a step. Recalibrated the focus and the circle held. Same diameter as a trash can lid. Dead even temperature. Too even. The woods weren't a lab. A perfect figure in the middle of mistakes meant intention. She panned left. Another one. She panned right. A third. They weren't random. They fell like notes in a phrase her ear didn't know but her bones might have. She counted 7 in the sweep she could see. Staggered in a crescent that arced into the trees in the direction her mind refused to call Sector 7. She crouched a little and put her free hand out toward the nearest. The air over it was 20 degrees colder. It wasn't wind, it wasn't microclimate. It was a precise absence. When her fingertips probed the invisible dome, condensation leapt to life on her knuckles in a flash frost, and began to bead and run. The cold wasn't on the ground. It rose. A hemisphere like a glass set over the earth. A moth blundered into her beam, doing its chaotic arithmetic. It brushed the edge of the dome and seized in mid-air as if hung on thread. Its wings went stiff. A glaze grew over them, delicate crystals in the shape of flight. It tumbled, struck the dirt inside the circle and lay there like a brooch. Maya stood up too fast, and saw stars that weren't on the scope. That move had cost her the discipline of breathing slowly. She let herself have one faster lungful, and then brought the dial back down. She scanned again, making herself narrate in her head as if she were writing the report later, and the right words would make the wrong thing buckle. Observing 7 circular depressions, no, zones, average diameter 30 inches, delta -20 Fahrenheit, evenly spaced, arc leading east. Northeast. Her GPS blinked affably on her wrist. The breadcrumb trail of her movement for the last 20 minutes looked obedient. She prodded the little map with her thumb, until it jumped to the wider view. The dot that meant you did not move when she turned toward the closure signage she could now see between trunks. Reflective letters catching the dim of her lamp like eyes in the brush. According to her device, she was still 2 miles south. According to her eyes, she was looking at the chain she'd promised herself she wouldn't touch again. Her radio wasn't on. She turned it on anyway because the policy in her bones was not the rule in her hand. Bass, Chen. Her voice did a small, shameful thing before the syllables steadied. I'm observing temperature anomalies in the vicinity of. She stopped herself, then let the truth out because lying on a radio felt like wrapping her foot in fishing line and sprinting. The Sector 7 gate. Static choked the channel like breath held too long. Maya, Jackson said finally. There was nothing on it now but human. You're supposed to be south. I know what the GPS says. I know what my eyes say. You know what the policy says. Common trios. He didn't wait for her to ask which one. Turn around. Walk back to marked trail. Do not stop. She could say copy and leave the circles sitting in the scope like patient, blue mouths, and live an hour longer with the fiction intact. She could also step closer, and put her boot into the cold the way you test ice in late spring, and find out what the forest wanted from a person willing to treat a rule like a suggestion. She eased one boot forward until her toe was right at the edge. Her breath began to show in little clouds that had no business living in June. She extended the tip of the boot into the circle and felt not cold but pressure, like the world preferred her to be somewhere else. Mushy leaves turned to crisp parchment under the sole. She withdrew and the pressure vanished. A hand removed from her throat. She swallowed without needing to. Copy, she said, because cowardice and wisdom wear the same coat most of the time. She backed 3 steps, then turned and walked. The circles sat behind her like eyes practicing not blinking. She did not look back. Every step away hurt in the muscle where curiosity and suicide overlap. The woods around her degraded from instrument panel back to forest. The scope went black in her hand when she held the power button a second too long on purpose. Her light found the trail like a dog finding heel again. She walked until the first campsite lantern made a small planet in the underbrush, and felt stupid for easing a fraction at the sight of cheap plastic. At the edge of Site 12, a man in his late 30s, the kind of fit that said app developer who found climbing 3 years ago, raised a hand. Hey Ranger, you folks do some kind of light show across the water at night. My wife swears she's seeing. Report it to the station if you see it again, she said. Too quickly, too sharply, and saw his smile harden into something that wouldn't ask for anything ever again. She softened her voice and added, Starlink looks weird at low angle. Folks mistake it for. She let the sentence trail out and watched him pick it up gratefully. He had wanted an explanation that fit in his mouth. She had given him one. He would sleep. Her radio hissed as if the channel itself had taken a deep breath and held it. Then, from nowhere on her belt because she had not touched the dial, Channel 19 spoke with the crisp cheer of an old dispatch tape. Jackson, do you copy? Lights are back over 7. The pattern's changed. The voice this time wasn't Williams. It was a tenor she didn't recognize, younger, with a laugh, hidden under the fear like he might still think the world could be talked into sense. Maya thumbed transmit. The urge was reflex, the dread was new. Identify, she said, because there was safety in asking the question that had a correct answer. Who is this? The voice said, irritated. Put Jackson on. She switched to main, which now felt like a neglected hallway with a locked door at the end. Base 19 is. Do not respond to 19, Jackson said. Do not listen to it. Do not widen the door. The phrase didn't belong to Ranger talk. It belonged to old country warnings, said at thresholds, with a hand on the knob. You keep moving, Chen. Her headlamp blinked. Once. The beam shivered and steadied. She'd replaced the batteries at 9. She slapped the barrel lightly, the way you fix machines when the thinking brain is out of tools, and the light answered with an innocent blaze that said, What? I'm fine. She kept moving because the alternative was to test whether stillness drew things or revealed them. She counted breaths when her heart tried to editorialize. She counted steps. She counted the ways she could be wrong. On the far side of the campground, a wind came up with no weather attached to it. It moved low, along the ground, and smelled like a freezer door opened in a hot kitchen. Her shoulders went up to meet it, and didn't come back down. A ribbon of fog unrolled between trees like cloth pulled off a long table. She watched it for the stupid beat it took to realize it wasn't fog. It was breath, condensing where the air went wrong. It traced a line from behind the cabins straight toward the closed sector, like exhaust from an invisible engine running under the topsoil. She took the scope back up without permission from any policy. The world simplified down to heat and not heat again. The ribbon was a procession of those circles, each one overlapping the next, just enough to give the illusion of motion. They were moving. The cold was moving. It laid itself down like tracks. She followed, and then stopped herself with a small, angry noise. This was the part of the horror movie where the idiot walked toward the violin scrape. She had a badge, and a brain that would not forgive her later. Her GPS pinged a cheerful update. The breadcrumb line she'd left on the screen while she watched the ribbon creep said she hadn't moved in 4 minutes. The policy she'd been given, the one with the odd handmade quality, whispered its patience in her ear. No ranger stays in one spot longer than 3 hours. The words didn't fit the situation. That was the worst thing about them. Rules that fit too many situations are traps. "Base," she said, putting her voice into the room like a wedge to keep the door from closing on her. "Confirm you have my track." "We have your track," Jackson said. "We also have your eyeballs, Chen. Keep your feet." "I can see 7, she said, and hated the rawness in the admission. "My device says I'm south." "I can see the signs." "We had a glitch last month," he said, too quickly. "New repeaters. It's fixed, but the handsets." "Jackson," she said. The way she used his name arrested them both. "Do you see it?" "From the station." A breath through his nose picked up by the little mic like a confession. "I see a line of trees," he said, "and a fog bank. And a sign somebody should have replaced 2 years ago. A beat. I don't look at that side much." "Why?" She wasn't sure she wanted him to answer. He didn't. The cold ribbon veered into the trees and became somebody else's problem. Maya walked until her legs believed in themselves again. She ducked into the ranger shack ruins, the low rectangle of stone that looked like a foundation and nothing else, and put her back against the wall, because sometimes you need an old human idea at your spine. The shortwave sat where she'd left it on a milk crate. She turned the knob as if she might be fed a weather update that would put all the weirdness into a column labeled temperature inversion. The speaker gave her the hiss of the Earth's own noise, then the climbing 3-tone ladder she'd heard earlier. Ding, ding, ding. It was too clean to be wind, and too regular to be accident. It sounded like something counting to a number that didn't exist. She lifted her head at a flicker in the trees like a person catching a friend's wave in a crowd. Light moved 70 feet up, not floating, not drifting, but walking, stepping around trunks, gliding over obstacles as if its feet knew where the branches would be, because it had been a bird longer than she had been alive. It wasn't fire. It wasn't drone light which stutters even when smoothed by the money of someone who cares. It was an animal kind of control. A second light fell into pace with the first. A third slotted in behind. The 3 of them drawing a shape she had no name for as they wound through the canopy, vanishing behind black trunks, and reappearing as if deciding to be real again. Her first thought, that childish hopeful one that never really dies, was that someone was playing with her. The park had rigged a reward for new hires who kept to their roots, a trick of LEDs on taut lines. Then one of the lights passed behind a hemlock, and the needles along the branch turned white with rime, as if a winter hand had closed briefly around them. The rime cracked when the wind touched it and fell in slow, sparkling dust. Her lamp died without warning. The beam pinched to nothing and left a smear on her retina shaped like her own disbelief. She smacked the casing once and got a dull, obstinate refusal. She dug out the spare from the pouch where it lived and thumbed it alive. It came up grudging and then obedient. She swung it into the canopy to find the moving lights. The radio woke in her hand without her consent. Her own voice came out of it, lagged by a half-second, a sick echo. "They're so beautiful up close, Maya." The delay made it sound like someone mocking a prayer. "You should come see." She turned the dial to main so hard her skin squeaked on plastic. "Bass." "Maya," Jackson said, and she could feel him standing at the map with one hand on the counter to keep from doing something with it. "Wherever you are right now, you walk back toward people. You do not run, you do not stop, you do not look up." She looked up. The lights paused as if caught doing something people had agreed lights should not do. The three of them rotated, the topmost pulling a slow circle around the other two in a motion that wasn't gravity but new gravity, the way a bully knows a school. The bottom light swung down a foot lower. She realized with a sudden, choking clarity that she was anthropomorphizing something that might not know the word down the way she did. The shortwave on the crate clicked. The three tones came again. 1, 2, 3. The lights echoed them. Not sound, but brightness in little pulses, answering a thing that called from the wrong century. The hairs along her arms stood up so hard her sleeves scratched. "Chen." The radio pressed Jackson's word into her palm. "Tell me where your boots are. Not your GPS. Not your eyes. Tell me the last marker you put your boot next to." She swallowed. She did not answer with a coordinate, she said, like a penitent in a booth 14. "I think." "Good." Relief loosened him a notch. "Go to 15. Then call me. Then 16. Call me again. I will sit on the radio until you tell me you're walking by the trash bear at Site 2. He took a breath she knew cost him. "If I stop talking to you for any reason, I want you to assume the building burned down and the Rangers all took jobs in town. You don't look back, you don't stop. You don't volunteer for anything you didn't sign for." "What about?" She looked at the canopy. The three lights had aligned, making a spear of bright that pointed at nothing she could explain. "You can't help something that doesn't want help," Jackson said softly. "You save the people who are still making choices." Her mouth was dry. "Who saved Williams?" Silence walked between them a few paces and then sat down. "Keep moving," Jackson said. She moved. The lights paced her in the trees for a dozen steps, and then lost interest the way an animal does, when the object of its curiosity insists on behaving like a rock. Twice she felt cold spill onto her from above, like water poured from a bucket, and lifted her arm blindly to shield her face. The spare headlamp gasped and flickered, and came back as if breathing thin air. She spoke her position every 10 steps, even though she knew radios didn't respond well to prayer. At the curve where Trail B pretended it had been A all along, she nearly put her boot onto a circle she hadn't seen in visible light. The thermal scope wasn't in her hand, but her skin knew the border of it like a bruised nose pressure. She veered and the life came back into the air around her as she left the edge. She didn't want to know what would happen if she stood in the center long enough to be measured. She kept moving, she said, 15 into the radio like it was a word with teeth and she needed to keep them in her mouth. Jackson said, "Copy." And it sounded like he'd gripped the counter until his knuckles shone. The forest adjusted its attention in minute ways she could not point at. Far off, somewhere it could be a mistake, a pot lid chimed again. The chair creaked once. Owls forgot, and then remembered to finish their sentences. When she reached 16, the trees ahead opened just enough to show a piece of sky. She looked up despite every rule, and there, in the seam of branches, she saw a light moving like a lantern on a ship's mast. Except ships don't climb trees, and lanterns don't freeze the needles they pass. It slid, left, right, stepped forward on no visible limb, paused as if to listen to something she could not hear, and then descended a slow, deliberate foot, as if the point was not to reach anything but to show it could. It wasn't fire, it wasn't a drone, it wasn't a trick, it was a plan the forest had made without consulting the part of the world that filled in forms. Maya stood very still, her breath turning into small ghosts in front of her, and understood that the rules of the night were not laws. They were manners learned from being ignored. And the thing in the trees was not a story the rangers told to keep tourists out of Sector 7. It was a thing the stories had learned to wrap themselves around so people could continue to stand in the dark and pretend they were the ones watching. The beam died like a thought you were about to have. One moment, the cone of light was on her boots and the path, full of its own little world of dust and midges. The next it pinched to black and left a smear on her retina shaped like doubt. The backup lamp came up weak as a candle. 2 fresh batteries she'd checked that afternoon now felt like coins with the faces rubbed off. "Copy?" she whispered without meaning to hit the transmit. "Because sometimes you prey to habits." Static answered. Then her voice answered, hers, lifted, and set back down a half-second late. "They're so beautiful up close, Maya." She clamped her jaw so hard her molars protested. The urge to say "that isn't me" was a child's instinct. The forest liked it when you argued with yourself. She thumbed to the main channel and didn't speak. Her breath fogged, which made no sense at 60 degrees. She aimed the failing beam upward, because she wasn't made of rules. They moved at the level of the second canopy, where limbs widened into platforms no human foot would trust. Light spheres the size of helmets, not glowing so much as deciding to be seen, slipped along lines that didn't exist. They kept a spacing like practiced dancers. One paused while the others rotated around it in a slow, thoughtful figure. Then it glided forward, and the others fell in, a murmuration made of frost. She tried to tell herself it was drones. Rangers ran programs with kids sometimes, like fire safety demonstrations with props, but drones whined. Drones dipped and corrected. These didn't wobble, they chose. The needles along a branch they passed whitened, as if breathed on by a glacier, then shed crystals in a soft rain that hissed where it touched the damp leaf litter. One peeled out of formation and sank toward her, not in a dive, nothing predatory about it, but like a lantern lowered by a patient hand. It halted a foot above the ground at the edge of one of the cold circles she'd mapped with the thermal, and the air hardened into glass. The sphere wasn't empty. Shapes moved in it the way silhouettes move behind frosted glass shower doors. Wrongly. 2 figures stood as if talking, except the bend in one's knee hinged sideways like the joint of a grasshopper. The other's head sat a little too far back on the spine as if the neck were an afterthought. Limbs extended and retracted without joints. Fingers grew and withdrew like roots testing soil. Their outlines jittered in small, impossible ways. She realized with a crawling slowness that she wasn't looking into the light. She was looking at a memory being played against air, a trapped scene that changed its mind how bones should work. Her radio breathed. "Don't be afraid," her voice said kindly. "Come see." The kindness broke her more than command would have. She ran. The forest rearranged itself to help. Paths kinked 45 degrees where they'd been straight an hour before. A lie of memory that made her turn where the map in her head insisted she shouldn't. She tore through a brace of saplings that had been on the other side of the trail earlier, and caught her shoulder on a trunk that had definitely grown closer out of spite. Ferns grabbed her ankles like hands. She knew, with a clarity you sometimes get in the middle of panic, that what moved wasn't the trees, what moved was the geometry. Something had picked up the forest like a mat and shaken it, and now the angle from point A to point B had thickened like cold honey. 16, she said, choking the number out as if it might anchor her. Marker 16. If she could get a number to agree with her mouth, she might persuade the world to remember math. "Copy," Jackson said, calm in a way that made it obvious he wasn't. "You're on B. Stay on B." B did not exist with the agreeableness it had displayed earlier. She floundered into what had been the old fire road, 2 tire ruts in moss and hope, and found herself in a small clearing that didn't belong to any map. The ground here was tamped flat by years of boots. A log lay like a bench. The bench had been used the same way too many times. The bark worn smooth where a thigh would go, the ends darkened with oils of waiting. She knew this place without ever having been here. It was where rangers sat when they needed the world to go back to being a job. The object on the log had once been a radio, now it was a cracked carcass, the casing fractured in a star from an impact that had made someone swear and not stop swearing. The antenna was snapped clean and bound with ancient electrical tape. The channel indicator was locked forever on 19. The speaker whispered like someone trying to say a secret around a mouthful of river stones. Beside it lay a name tag. The plastic had fogged with years and UV, but when she thumbed grime off with a steady thumb, she could read the engraving beneath. D. Williams. The space between her heartbeats turned into a seat she could fall through. Jackson's voice arrived from the ordinary world, as if the two sounds occupied the same room but refused to talk. "Do not touch it," he said. "No greeting. No, are you there? Walk away, Maya." Her hand hovered, trembled, landed anyway, but on the log, she didn't touch the radio. She set her fingers against old wood and felt grooves cut there, shallow and human. 3 lines next to one another, close enough to be a signature if a person had been refusing to sign. In the moss by her boots a triangle had been traced at some point with the point of a knife. 3 corners, 3 circles, a little map of something that wanted to believe in geometry because it didn't trust people. "Copy," she said and stood. She couldn't leave the tag, couldn't take it either. The name on it would scrape along her throat like a cough if she tried to swallow it. She propped it upright against the old radio, so the letters could see air and the living. It felt superstitious and childish. It felt correct. The forest let her find Trail B again, because she'd chosen the right shape of respect. She checked herself with deliberate slowness. Headlamp straps, thermal scope, notebook, because method was a blanket she could put over terror and, for seconds at a time, make it behave. The light returned in the canopy. It didn't chase. It watched with the patient attention of a hawk that knows prey forgets what sky is after enough stumbling. The Sector 7 sign, the new one, reflective with the cheerful government font that meant we tested this sentence with 12 focus groups, stood at an angle, as if the ground under it had decided to shrug. Up close, the green paint failed to hide scratches. At first she read them as vandalism. Teenagers with knives, and nothing better to do. Then she leaned until her breath fogged on the metal. Not letters. Not names. Triangles, over and over, dug shallowly so the sign would still do its job. Some had tiny circles at the corners. Beside one cluster, 3 vertical hash marks sat like tally. She pressed her pencil against the plastic cover of her notebook, and traced without touching. Her eyes started to water. It wasn't emotion. The cold circles made the air a gently invisible knife. When she stepped back, the circles she'd mapped on her scope earlier, and the little carvings on the sign braided together into sense. Whatever the lights were, whatever the cold was, it didn't wander. It obeyed shapes. Somebody had learned those shapes the way you learn a cage. Her radio crackled, then snapped into sharpness like someone had slapped the side of the world. "Maya," Jackson's voice came low. "Where are you?" "You tell me," she said before she could find the caution to soften it. "You've been telling me all night." A beat. "Do not touch anything that isn't yours," he said again, biting the words this time. "Walk away." "Why 19?" she asked. "Why 3 hours? Why triangles? Tell me what I'm walking away from." A long exhale. She pictured him at the station desk, fingers braced on old wood, eyes on the maps on the wall without reading them. "Our job is simple," he said finally, and the simplicity was a lie that had been rehearsed. "Keep the campers safe. Keep the trails clear. Keep the secrets buried." "You told me not to widen the door," she said. "Who taught you to say that?" Silence grew hair. "Turn around," he said. "Now." She pivoted, because she didn't have the budget for defiance and survival both, and the forest let her go because she'd asked a true question and then done something humble. The lights in the canopy retracted like breath. Down trail, a bear rustled a trash can with the dignity of an old drunk. Sound returned piecemeal to the night. the shake of leaves, a raccoon with opinions, a sudden chorus of frogs that had been holding their throats. The world pretended it had always been this way. The ranger station glowed like a ship in fog. She stepped inside and the smell of old coffee and oiled wood tried to seat itself in her lungs. Jackson was at the desk, exactly where she'd pictured him, lines carved deeper than a day's worth around his mouth. He had 2 mugs in front of him. The one he used and the one nobody used but nobody got rid of. He pushed the real one toward her. "How was your first night?" he asked, as if this was the exchange that decided what the station made of her. She stayed standing. "What is 19? He rubbed at the corner of his eye with the heel of his hand, a gesture that said tired and meant don't. "You did your route," he said. "You logged an unregistered site. You maintained contact." "Sector 7 is closed for maintenance," she said dully. "Since when do we maintain a thing by pretending it doesn't exist?" "You're alive," he said. "That's the maintenance that matters." She stepped closer to the desk. The maps on the wall behind him had been layered over time. Paper jaws eating paper tails. A corner of something white stuck out from beneath a clipboard. She didn't intend to look. Her eyes were faster than intentions. A gold seal flashed and the precise cruelty of serif letters announced themselves around it. "In memory of Ranger David Williams. Year start. Year stop. Lost in the line of duty." She didn't pull it out. She didn't have to. The name sat on her tongue like ice. "There's never been a Ranger Williams," Jackson said too quickly. So quickly she heard the echo of herself moments ago insisting something didn't exist because it couldn't. He followed her gaze without wanting to. His hand flicked, casual, to shuffle papers, to hide. The move was older than either of them. "You told me not to look up," she said. "You told me not to stop. You told me not to widen a door. You told me I was nowhere near 7, and then you told me to walk away from the 7 sign. And you want me to drink burnt coffee, and write that I checked latrines." "Our job is simple," he repeated, and the sentence sounded like a sore tooth he kept tonguing. "Keep campers safe." "From what?" she said. He looked at her then, really looked. Measuring the part of her that had more stubborn than good sense. "From knowing," he said. The lights in the corners of the ceiling flickered at the same instant the shortwave in the ruins out back would have hissed. She didn't have proof of the second thing, but her bones did. "Is that what happened to Williams?" she asked, and even saying the name felt like opening a box with your face too close. Jackson's fingers tapped the desk once. A little 3-beat tattoo. He stopped himself as if he'd heard the count and didn't want to teach the room to play along. "We lost track of him on a night like this," he said. "Long time ago. Before the policy. Before we had the fences." He didn't say triangles. He didn't have to. The little cuts on the sign had belonged to somebody's hands. Hands with keys to this building. "He called on 19, she said. She didn't make it a question this time. "He called on every channel he could find," Jackson said. His voice went small. "Sometimes it takes a while for a last thing to finish falling." The radio on her shoulder breathed in, ready to be useful or betraying. She thumbed it off. The silence that resulted wasn't silence at all. It was all the tiny noises a place makes when it's relieved not to have to say anything for a second. She dropped into the chair across from him without meaning to sit. The chair creaked in the same unhappy tone they all did, the one that made you apologize to furniture. "Those circles," she said. "You never asked me how I knew I was near 7. You told me to walk away from something cold." "I never said cold." He stared at the coffee between his hands like it might confess. "We learned to mark edges," he said, "places it liked, shapes it obeyed. If you make it a shape it recognizes, it stays where it's put. Mostly. So we keep the campers on the other side of the shapes, and we keep our mouths shut, and we make sure new rangers walk, not stand. And when 19 speaks we say no thank you, to the part of our brains that likes magic tricks. You keep the secrets buried," she said, and there it was. Flat as policy, smaller than truth. Somebody has to, he said, or they get up on their own. Is that what you call them? She asked. Secrets. Do you have a better word? He asked, and looked slightly relieved that she didn't. She resisted the urge to take the certificate out from under the clipboard and hold it up. It would humiliate him and not help. Why stay, she said instead. Why not transfer? Why not tell somebody with more badges to draw bigger triangles? They tried bigger, he said. Bigger just means later. Small and layered works. Doesn't make stories. And I like the trees. He said it without apology, which was either brave or a confession you made when you had stopped waiting for permission to be who you were. Her skin remembered the feel of the cold pressure when she set her boot at the edge of one of the circles. It knows my name, she said, the foolishness of the sentence burning her ears as she said it and not caring. He didn't argue. He looked past her at the window, at the black mirror the glass made of them both. It knew mine, he said. It knows everybody's who says yes to nights. He pushed one of the mugs toward her again, not because coffee fixed anything, but because ritual fills the space where fear gets ideas. Go home. Sleep. Don't dream. Come back tonight. She laughed. A short, ugly noise. You think I'm coming back? I think you will, he said. The ones who hear it and still have sense usually do. It's the ones who hear it and think it's about them I worry about. His eyes flicked to the corner, where a spare radio sat in a charger. He didn't glance at 19. He didn't have to. She stood because sitting made her feel like furniture. The station felt too small for the conversation they were having inside it. Two people trying to argue with a set of trees. On the corkboard behind Jackson, half hidden under a flyer for a trail run, a cheap frame held a photograph. The man in it wore the uniform wrong, the way people wear uniforms when they're still deciding if they're the kind of person who belongs in one. Grin too wide, eyes too bright. The name strip on his chest blurred in the poor print, but her mind insisted on reading David anyway. You should take that down, she said, or hang it on a wall that doesn't have to lie. Jackson didn't turn to look. If I take it down, the new ones don't ask, he said. If they don't ask, they find out the way he did. She picked up the mug because the weight in her hand kept her from floating loose. The coffee tasted like something that had been convinced to keep being coffee long after it wanted to be mud. She put it down on a ring that matched 3 other rings almost exactly. Her thumb traced the circles without meaning to. On the desk edge someone long ago had notched 3 tiny cuts, the secret counted into wood, a habit scared into a shape. The building breathed around them. Radios murmured. The wind put its palm against the siding like someone deciding whether to knock. Somewhere out by the closed sector, a light moved through branches with the confidence of a thing that had practiced. It would be daylight soon. Daylight meant the forest pretending to wear a face she recognized. What do I put in the log? She asked finally. Jackson exhaled like he'd been holding his belly in for hours. Improper site registration at 12. Canoe checks complete. Trail B clear to 16. No contact with wildlife beyond normal. No mention of anything. Write it down and you make it a story, he said. Stories want listeners. And secrets want out, she said. Not because she believed in anthropomorphizing phenomena, but because the sentence answered the shape of the night. He spread his hands, palms up, empty, as if he were about to play a coin trick to distract a child. Our job is simple, he said one last time for the road. Keep campers safe. From us, she said. It wasn't a question he didn't answer. On her way out she passed the little closet, where they kept old weather gear and unsortable junk. The door was ajar. Inside, stacked against the back wall under a tarp that had been folded more times than it deserved, sat 3 bright plastic triangles, the kind hazard crews use on highways. They had been painted forest green. At each corner somebody had drilled a hole and threaded red cord that had been knotted with care. Cloverleaf knots. 3 loops. The triangles leaned against a coil of cold rope. Even covered, even retired, they looked like shapes that had been taught patience. In the parking lot, a young man in a too-new jacket got out of a compact car, paper manual clutched against his chest like a catechism. He blinked at the building with a dog's eager frankness. "Hi," he said when their paths intersected, relief warm on his breath. First night. Where do I?" "Inside," she said. Her voice came out gentle. She had not planned that. "He'll give you the—" She almost said official briefing, she almost said rules. She settled on coffee. He grinned and hurried in. Through the open door she heard Jackson's voice settle itself into the shape it took for new people. "Welcome to Pinebrook. Tonight's your first night shift. Let me tell you the official procedures." Maya stood for a moment with her hand on the roof of her car and watched the tree line. The sun thought about committing to the horizon, and decided to try. Color returned to the world, with the reluctance of someone shaking off a heavy quilt. The woods looked like any woods that smell of damp earth and pine pitch, the kind where the worst thing you had to worry about at noon was a kid with a hatchet and a good imagination. She got in, turned the key, backed out. Gravel made small cheerful sounds under her tires as if this were a normal place where cars did normal leaving. On the passenger seat the thermal scope sat like a dog that didn't understand why they were going home when the stick was still in the yard. She didn't look at it. She didn't have to. Her hands were still cold from holding air that wasn't supposed to be that temperature. At the end of the lane the rearview framed the station small and patient against the trees. For 1 second in the glass something moved above the canopy. A light that could have been the sun being born wrong. It sank back into the needles the way a fish sinks when it remembers lake is heavier than air. She turned onto the road, she drove away, she did not turn the radio on. She held the steering wheel with both hands and told herself out loud the names of trees she passed. As if taxonomy could keep her from becoming a person who lived inside a story she hadn't consented to. At the bottom of the hill the pot-lid buoy clanged 3 clean tones and fell quiet, like somebody far away practicing a secret language with just enough discretion to keep neighbors guessing. The hair along her arm lifted again, no breeze to explain it. On the passenger seat the radio she'd sworn was off hummed once in its casing. She didn't look. She said Douglas fir. Red alder. Oregon grape. She hit the highway. She kept going. She knew, before the next sign announced the town's name like a promise, that she would sleep, and wake, and come back anyway. Not because the job demanded it. Not because Jackson would expect it. Because the forest had learned her name, and she needed to decide whether it got to keep it. The mist at dawn doesn't rise. It hangs. Maya's boots squelched in wet soil as she staggered toward the access road, each step loud against the unnatural quiet. She could hear her own blood in her ears, louder than birdsong that should have started by now. The sky was graying at the edges, paling into what should have been comfort, but the treetops weren't still. They moved with her. Faint orbs, dimmer than they had been in the depths of night, drifted between pine crowns like lanterns carried by unseen hands. They didn't dive, didn't threaten, just paced her, watching, waiting. One dipped suddenly, no more than 30 feet above her head. Her radio, she swore it was off, screeched to life, vomiting a mess of overlapping voices, crying, pleading, laughter, pitched exactly like her own. The noise was unbearable. Like a dozen Mayas stacked on top of each other, each one begging in a different key. She slapped at the radio until her palms stung, but the sound didn't stop until the light rose back into the canopy. A truck appeared at last, a shape she had never loved more than in that moment. But the relief shattered the instant the ranger station door opened behind her. Jackson stood in the threshold, coffee steaming in his hand. He looked calm, too calm. Like a man rehearsing normalcy. "Maya," he said, "you made it back." "Good." She turned, trembling. "What the hell did I see out there?" "Stress," he said, gently, like he was explaining thunder to a child. "Long night, first night. Stress plays tricks." She laughed. One sharp, brittle note. Stress doesn't drain batteries. Stress doesn't carve symbols into steel signs. He didn't flinch. He gestured inside. Come, let's log your patrol. Inside, the station smelled of burnt coffee and cedar paneling, exactly as it had at midnight, as if the night had never happened. Jackson guided her to the desk, where her gear lay in neat order. The thermal scanner's memory showed blank terrain, no cold circles. Her GPS log traced a perfect route along Trail B, no detour to Sector 7. Her radio log displayed standard channel reports, nothing from 19. See? Jackson said softly, clean run. By the book. You did good. Her throat closed. I know what I saw. The important thing, Jackson said, calm as ever, is that you followed protocol. That's what matters. Then her gaze dropped. On the desk, beneath the paperwork, sat the commendation plaque, the one she'd glimpsed last night. In memory of Ranger David Williams. But beside it lay another plaque, newer, shiny, the engraving unfinished, only the heading carved so far, in memory of Ranger. The space beneath was blank, waiting. Her knees wavered. Jackson's eyes followed hers. He didn't move to cover it this time. He just said, low and tired, every ranger learns the rules eventually. Maya backed away from the desk. She couldn't breathe inside that office anymore. She tore her name tag off her uniform and dropped it on the table with a sharp clatter. I quit! Jackson didn't look surprised. He only nodded once, as if she'd just said what he'd been expecting all along. She packed her gear in silence. The thermal scope, the useless flashlight, her manual, crammed into her bag like a relic from a world that didn't exist anymore. The station door creaked open as she stepped into the cold dawn. A car was pulling up the gravel road, tires crunching. A young man stepped out, forestry manual tucked under one arm, his uniform too crisp, too new. He looked nervous, then smiled when he saw Jackson in the doorway. Jackson's voice carried through the still air. Welcome to Pinebrook, son. Tonight's your first night shift. Let me tell you the official procedures. Maya froze. The boy's eager eyes flicked to her, but she couldn't form words. She forced herself to walk, each step heavier than the last, until she slid behind the wheel of her truck. She drove. Gravel spat behind her tires, swallowed quickly by mist. She didn't turn the radio on, not once. But halfway down the road, the speaker crackled to life anyway. Her own voice whispered, soft, intimate, "You'll be back." Her headlights cut through the fog, then vanished into the dawn mist. Above the road, hidden in the treetops, faint lights floated, keeping pace. Waiting. The forest never let go, it just let you think you were leaving.